Good morning, and welcome to our presentation of the 2016 Hamilton College Levitt Poll entitled The Russian Elite, Perspectives on Foreign and Domestic Policy. I'm Sharon Morning Rivera, and I'm an Associate Professor of Government at Hamilton College. As you know, post-Soviet Russia's assertiveness in international affairs has reached new heights, and the relationship between Russia and the United States has been more confrontational during the past 2 years than at any point since Mikhail Gorbachev assumed the leadership of the Soviet Union in 1985. Yet, survey data on whether Russian elites support the more muscular foreign policy characteristic of Vladimir Putin's third presidential term have been largely unavailable until now. With generous funding from the Arthur Levitt Public Affairs Center at Hamilton College, students at Hamilton have analyzed the data we collected in order to explore this question. The results we present today are based on 243 face-to-face interviews of Russian elites employed in a broad array of institutions in the Russian Federation. There are 7 subgroups in the sample. They consist of high-ranking individuals working in the executive branch, the legislative branch, private firms, state-owned enterprises, major media outlets, universities and large academic research institutes, and the armed forces and security agencies. The interviews lasted an average of 60 minutes and were conducted very recently in February and March of this year. The 2016 Hamilton College Levitt Poll is an international collaborative project directed by me, William Zimmerman of the University of Michigan, and Edward Panarin of the National Research University Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg. This year's survey is not a standalone project. It is the 7th in a series that began in 1993 under the direction of William Zimmerman of the University of Michigan and now spans close to 25 years. We are thus able to examine trends extending from the immediate post-communist period to the present day. Moreover, the surveys were all conducted by the same opinion research firm, employed the same methodology, and most of the survey questions were replicated. This morning, my 5 students in Government 333, which is the introductory survey research course that I teach at Hamilton College, will take 25 minutes to acquaint you with their main findings. They will begin with domestic politics, exploring what elites have to say about the future of Putin, his political party United Russia, and the current political system. They will then turn to foreign policy, analyzing responses to survey questions about threats to Russia's security, how Russia defines its national interests, and the role of military force in the world. They will conclude with elite responses to queries about Russia's military involvement in Syria and Ukraine. Thank you again for joining us, and now to my students.
Hello, my name is Nora Clemmer, and I am a junior studying government. Vladimir Putin served as president of Russia from 2000 to 2008 and won a 3rd term in 2012. Although his approval ratings dropped during the protest movements of 2011 and 2012, after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, those ratings rose to nearly 90% and have not dropped since. The first finding we explored was in regards to the elite's expectation for Vladimir Putin and United Russia in the following decade. In the first graph, we see that the elites do not see a realistic alternative to Putin emerging within the next 10 years. After being asked, in your opinion, which of the following situations is very likely, quite likely, unlikely, or completely unlikely in the next 10 years, with the options being a party or movement other than United Russia will come to power, and someone other than Vladimir Putin will become president. Close to 80% of the surveyed elites replied that it was unlikely or completely unlikely that someone other than Putin would become president in the next decade. Given that the presidential elections are scheduled for 2018, this shows that the elites envision a 4th term with him. United Russia is also projected to be robust over the foreseeable future. Nearly 80% of the elites responded that it seems unlikely or completely unlikely that any party or movement other than United Russia would win an election in the next 10 years. The dominance of United Russia was also evident when the respondents reported their party affiliations. Of the 243 elites we surveyed, 42% responded that they were members of a certain party, while 58% responded that they did not belong to a particular party or movement. Of the 42% who align themselves with a party, the vast majority of them are members of United Russia. For those who replied no to being a member of a party, they were asked a follow-up question about which party best reflects their views. The party selected most often was United Russia. So when we combined United Russia members with sympathizers, it made up 3/5 of our sample. The second finding we explored was in regards to elites' preferred political system. In response to the question, which political system, in your opinion, fits Russia best, there has been a rising trend since 2004 for support of Russia's current political system. In 2004 and 2008, the response selected most often was the Soviet system, but in a more democratic form, with nearly 36% and close to 40% of respondents choosing this option. In 2012, the current political system was selected by a plurality of the elites for the first time, and then in 2016, this percentage increased even more to almost 43% of the sample, while the preference for a democratic Soviet system remained largely where it was in 2012, which represents a significant decrease from 2008. Given these two key findings, we conclude that the elites expect the dominance of Vladimir Putin and United Russia to continue over the next decade.
Hi, my name is Carlos Feynman, and I'm a junior studying government. Nora spoke about the survey responses we received from Russian elites about Putin and United Russia. I will speak about the different threats that elites believe are a danger to the security of Russia. The first key finding we saw was the perceptions of the United States as a threat are at the highest since 1993. This graph shows the percentage of respondents who answered yes or no to the question, do you think that the United States represents a threat to Russia's national security? The red bar signifies the respondents who said no, while the blue bar represents the respondents who said yes to the question. It is interesting to see the trend since the first survey in 1993 of the steady increase in respondents who said that the United States is a threat to the national security of Russia. In 1993, the threat perception was at an all-time low when 73% of the sample said no to the question that the United States posed a threat. By 2016, this trend peaked when over 2/3 of Russian elites expressed agreement with the statement that the United States is a threat to Russia's national security. In the next graph, we focused on the question that was asked throughout the different surveys, which says, which on the list below represents the utmost threat to the security of Russia and which do not constitute a threat at all. Respondents were asked to rate each of the threats on a 5-point scale, where 1 was the absence of threat and 5 was the utmost threat to the security of Russia. We identified 3 different interesting threats that were deemed to be the utmost danger to Russia's national security. These were inability of the Russian government to solve domestic problems, the growth of the United States military, and border conflicts of Russia with the Commonwealth independent states. The blue line represents the percentage of respondents who answered the inability of the Russian government to solve domestic problems as an utmost threat. In every year but 2004, more respondents ranked this threat as the utmost danger to the security of Russia. In 1995, this reached a peak when 55% of elites responded that this was the utmost danger to the Russian national security. The red line represents elites who ranked the growth of the U.S. military as the utmost danger. In 1993, only 7% of Russian elites ranked this to be the utmost threat. In 1999, this danger reached an all-time high when 35% of elites feared the growth of the United States military. By 2016, however, only 7% of Russian elites agreed with this point of view. In the next table, we displayed the threats that were evaluated by respondents in 2016 and the percentages of elites who believe that these threats were the utmost danger. The thing we focused on from this data was about questions about the fear of an information war conducted by the West and a color revolution, which would be a popular protest movement against governments in the post-communist regions. This is particularly interesting since these topics are talked about by the Kremlin and Putin very often. However, when Russian elites were asked if these threats were of utmost danger to the security of Russia, Russian elites did not believe that this was. In 2016, a color revolution was only ranked as the utmost danger by 2% of Russian elites. Likewise, an information war conducted by the West was only viewed by 3% of respondents to be the utmost danger. By contrast, the inability to solve domestic problems is still at the top of the list, with 32% of respondents answering that it was the utmost danger.
Hi, my name is Brisa Camacho Level. I'm a senior world politics and Hispanic studies major. As one means of assessing their attitude toward the U.S., we compared elites' responses over time to a question regarding how hostile they believe the United States is towards Russia. As shown in figure 4.1, in 2016, 88% of respondents answered that the U.S. is either fairly or very hostile to Russia. This is the highest percentage since the first survey was conducted in 1993, when 10% of the sample rated the U.S. as hostile. It even surpasses the previous high point of concern that appeared in 2008, the year of the Russian-Georgian War, when 71% of respondents agreed that the U.S. was either fairly or very hostile to Russia. Although few elites over time have replied that the U.S. is very friendly, we found that the percentage selecting fairly friendly has followed a steep downward trajectory over time, with a one-time deviation upward in 2012. The high point was in 1993, during the initial post-communist period, when 56% of elites selected fairly friendly. The low point emerged this year in the 2016 data, when only 0.4% of respondents indicated that the U.S. is fairly friendly. Another survey question we use to evaluate attitudes toward the U.S. is the following. Russia, being one of the most powerful actors in international politics, develops relationships with all other actors in world politics. However, if you had to choose, with which one of these would you prefer to form a coalition? Options included the U.S., the European Union, and China, and in the 2016 survey, none of the above. As figure 4.2 shows, in the 2016 survey, 34% of those surveyed answered that none of the options would be a suitable coalition partner. This was followed by the European Union and China in the 2016 survey. There was a slight drop in those who chose the European Union and China between the 2012 and 2016 surveys, which can be potentially explained by the addition of the none of the above category in the 2016 survey. Responses reflecting the unsuitability of the United States as a coalition partner have barely budged. Only 8% preferred the United States as a potential coalition partner in 2012, dropping to a mere 7% in 2016. Although anti-Western sentiment as a whole pervades the elite sector, anti-US feelings are the most pronounced. Even in the face of the European Union's economic sanctions against Russia, over a quarter of Russian elites still selected Europe as the actor in international politics with which they would prefer to form a coalition. In sum, the perceived hostility of the United States is at an all-time high, which is partially shown in the finding that less than 10% of elites would select the U.S. as a coalition partner. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Emma Rayner, and I am a sophomore majoring in world politics. Given Russia's recent activity on the international stage, we want to look at the elite's views on military assertiveness. Our first way of doing this was through looking at what they perceived to be the scope of Russian national interests. We asked if the national interests of Russia should be limited to its existing territory or extend beyond its existing territory. The responses of Russian elites between 1999 and 2012 reveal increasing support for a more limited delineation of Russian national interests. The 2016 survey, however, shows a departure from results obtained in the last 3 survey waves. As Figure 5.1 reveals, in 1999, 82% of elites agreed that Russia's national interests, for the most part, extend beyond its existing territory. This percentage declined in 2004 to 72%, and again in both 2008 and 2012. In fact, 2012 was the first year in which this viewpoint was expressed by a minority, 43% of Russian elites. Yet in 2016, this percentage returned to the high point previously reached in 1999. 82% of Russian elites agreed that Russia has expansive national interests. Another way we looked at Russian elites' views on military assertiveness was by analyzing whether they stated that the military potential or economic potential of a nation determined its role in international relations. In all previous waves of the survey, a majority of Russian elites expressed agreement that the economic, not military potential of a country determines its place in the world. Although since 1993, confidence in the potential of military force has grown steadily, this is the first time that a majority of elites, 52%, has agreed with the statement that military force will always ultimately decide everything in international relations. By examining this question through a generational lens, we found that only among respondents born in 1971 or later did a majority agree that a country's economic potential determine its role in international relations. Specifically, slightly over half, 53% of respondents born in 1971 or later, agreed that a country's economic potential was the decisive factor, compared to 46% of those born between 1961 and 1970, 45% born between 1951 and 1960, and 23% of those born in 1950 or earlier. Overall, the 2016 data reveal a Russian elite that perceives a more expansive scope of Russia's national interests. The data also show that while the majority of Russian elites agree that the military, not economic potential of a nation determines its role in international relations, generational results could be evidence of a younger generation of Russian elites that is less inclined to rely on military force. Thank you.
Hello, my name is James Bryan and I'm a senior studying economics and government. The increasing military assertiveness among elites that Emma previously mentioned goes hand in hand with the increased Russian military interventionism, which is embodied by the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its more recent military involvement in the Syrian conflict. Specifically, with regards to the Ukrainian crisis, elites stated the annexation of Crimea did not violate international laws and agreements, and that U.S. action led to the 2013-2014 crisis. When asked whether the annexation of Crimea violated international law and post-war and post-Soviet international agreements, an overwhelming 88% responded definitely no or probably no, compared to only 11% that said probably or definitely yes. It should be noted that the views expressed by elites are largely in line with the mass public, who share a similar support for the annexation of Crimea. Secondly, when asked what led to the crisis in Ukraine, 76% said attempts by the United States to foment another color revolution, compared to only 35% that said the Ukrainian opposition resorting to armed methods of protest, and 28% that said the hopes of regular Ukrainians that closer association to the European Union would help solve fundamental problems. The responses of Russian elites are clear. The annexation of Crimea was justified, and the Ukrainian crisis was started by the United States attempting to foment another color revolution rather than from within Ukraine itself. With regard to the Syrian conflict, there's a clear consensus among elites that the intervention is justified on humanitarian grounds and that their government's intentions are to stop the spread of military activities of Islamic radicals to Russia. When asked their position on the international military intervention, 63% said it was necessary to stop violence and human rights violations, compared to only 28% that believe it is an intervention in the internal affairs of a state. Next, when asked what the Russian government's goals were for participating in the conflict, it can be seen by the blue bars in the figure shown that 76% of respondents said it was to stop the spread of military activities by Islamic radicals to Russia, compared to only 5% who answered as to support Bashar al-Assad, and 4% that said the government is attempting to distract the Russian public from the domestic economic crisis, both of which are commonly held views in the West. Additionally, the views of the mass public, whose responses are shown in red, are largely in line with elites, but they seem more tentative in their support for Russia's military engagement in the Syrian civil war. A plurality of respondents, 49%, said the government's motivations were to stop military activities by Islamic radicals to Russia, a steep drop from 76% of elites, but still far more than any other available response. Additionally, 15% of the mass public said they did not know why the government was participating in the conflict, compared to only 7% of elites. Overall, it is clear that the Russian elites responded that the military interventions in Ukraine and Syria are justified. Specifically, that the annexation of Crimea did not violate international laws and agreements, and that the Syrian intervention is a matter of national security and human rights violations. Thank you.
This concludes our presentation of the 2016 Hamilton College Levitt Poll. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning, and I'd like to thank the Arthur Levitt Public Affairs Center for its generous support of this project. The report that includes the full analyses, the exact survey questions, and a complete description of the methodology will be available on the Hamilton College website. We would encourage you to email us with your questions or comments. And thank you again for joining us.